What is up, Sleep Tribe? Welcome to a brand new episode of the Healthy Sleep Revolution podcast. As always, I am your host, Dr. Magna Dasani. Today, I wanted to bring a special guest who I've actually had the pleasure of meeting during the pandemic, no other crazy times. And it's funny how our paths crossed. And I was thinking about what else impacts sleep. And I was like, I know who we need to talk to. So I want to welcome Dr. Vincent Pedre. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Perfect.
Vincent Pedre.
To today's episode. There's so much I can talk about this man and everything he is on a quest to help us with in our journey of wellness. I will have his extensive bio in our show notes because I really don't want to waste time and take away from what we can learn from him. But Dr. Pedre practices functional medicine with a focus on gut health. And I know he has a practice in New York. So such a cool conversation I had. And I met him over breakfast. And he actually has a new book that I'm excited to share with you guys, which I do think y'all should read. So much to learn from there. So welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. And crazy we met during the pandemic and here we are, sort of post-pandemic world, if we are, but I'm so happy to have this conversation with you. And also, first time actually that I'm talking about the gut sleep connection. So I'm really excited to be on your podcast because it's a very different conversation than I've had in many other interviews.
Yeah. As a practicing dentist and you're a functional medicine doc, I'm a functional dentist. We look at the whole body health, right? And there's so many parents. I see adults as well as children. And this is one of the big topics that I was like, we really what does their gut health look like? So tell me about your journey with gut healing and why are you so passionate about this?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's actually something that was right under my nose. And yet, for some reason, when I was in medical school and even afterwards, when I was in my residency training in internal medicine, it didn't really cross my head that I would become so interested in the digestive system. And actually, while I was in residency as an intern, my first year, the chief of gastroenterology was so impressed with me during rounds because he had joined he was like a guest with our team, that he took me aside and asked me, would you ever consider gastroenterology? And I just looked at him and I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't really want to do endoscopies or colonoscopies or procedures. I associated it with that. And honestly, it was not on my radar. And yet I was suffering from IBS. I had irritable bowel syndrome from having been on so many antibiotics as a child, developing leaky gut as a result, and then developing food sensitivities to gluten and dairy among some other foods, but those were the top two. And I was had been poisoning myself for years, eating cereal with milk for breakfast, sandwiches, pizza. I was so overexposed to these foods that my body was inflamed. By the time I finished residency, I thought that I had adrenal fatigue. I was in so much fatigue, and I thought it was 100-hour work weeks. I had mental fog. I didn't feel well, and I wasn't making the association with my diet until I discovered functional medicine. And that was about a couple of years after I finished my training as an internal medicine doctor, even though I had already was very interested in alternative medicine or complementary medicine, had been meditating, doing breath work. I had been doing yoga. I had been reading books by Dr. Hyman. So I was really curious, but it wasn't until I actually went to my first conference and it was like, it just blew my mind. Like, wait a second. All this stuff that is going on inside of me that I thought I'm going to have to live with for the rest of my life, that is just my body makeup, that I have a sensitive stomach, that I've got IBS, irritable bowel. There's no cure for it. There are only medications that treat the symptoms, but nothing that truly ever resolves it permanently, that I'm just going to have to live with this, to discover that, wait a second, this could be reversed. I don't have to live with this stomach, like going out to dinner and not knowing if it's going to disagree with me. I'm going to feel really bloated. I'm going to have to run to the bathroom. I'm going to have an upset stomach. I'm not going to sleep well that night because my digestion is a mess. And I became my first gut patient. and started rebalancing my gut microbiome, changing my diet, boosting my taking probiotics, but also eating fermented foods, like basically healing my gut. And as a result, I just got so curious about gut health that I started paying attention to patients when they came in and they had migraines, but they also had IBS, or they came in with eczema, but they also had stomach issues, or they came in with allergies or asthma, and they also had stomach issues. And I started just hearing, it's like suddenly it was this world that I hadn't been fully aware of. And you always thought when someone came in with a gut problem, is it constipation? I'll give you a laxative. If you have diarrhea, I'll give you something to stop the diarrhea. And that's how a Western doctor thinks. You're not thinking that, wait a second, the gut microbiome maybe is imbalanced. Maybe there's leaky gut. Maybe there's inflammation. Maybe there's digestive enzyme insufficiency. Maybe there's low stomach acid. And I hated that about Western medicine. It intuitively, I felt like I was being only, when it came to the digestive system, that I was being like a quarter of a doctor, that there were all of these things that were mysterious that weren't being answered. And yet intuitively, I knew that they weren't being answered. And I felt frustrated inside because I thought, my toolbox is not big enough to help people. And so when I became curious about it, I just started helping people with their gut issues, and then seeing like they come back and they're like, oh, I have no allergies this year, doc. Or my asthma got better. I'm not using my inhaler as much. Or my skin rash disappeared. My migraines are now 50% of what they were. And my eyes just like open wide. I'm like, wait a second, this is the root of everything. And people would refer their friends, their family, their colleagues, their work colleagues. And before I knew it, I had this practice that a whole part of my practice was dedicated to gut health without even deciding. So I almost say that I became an accidental gut health expert just by pursuing what I found to be fascinating and interesting, and also highly impactful for people's health. And that's what finally led me to write my first book, Happy Gut, and just like threw me down this rabbit hole of gut health, and where I've been for so many years, and now coming out with my second book, the GutSMART Protocol. And I just feel so passionate about it.
Yeah, isn't it amazing when we actually address the root cause versus just throwing band-aids against issues and hoping they stick? And even if they do, it's so temporary. So why a second book?
Oh, yes. With my first book, I feel like I was really early on in the wave of people finally starting to recognize the gut microbiome and the gut as something important. But I also wrote my first book as a catch-all. It was for everyone. It's one diet that applies to everyone. And it was quite challenging to do that. Little did I know that my second book would be even more challenging, because what I decided to do after many years of experience taking care of gut patients and realizing that there are no two guts that are the same. So how can we prescribe the same diet to different people? Realizing that what really needs to happen is a personalized plan. And that's what I tackled to do in my second book, along with updating so much of the science that has evolved since when I wrote my first book back in 2014, 2015. In the last 8 years, the science has just exploded. And just the interconnections that we're seeing between the gut microbiome and so many things: migraines, anxiety, depression, skin health, acne, eczema, respiratory issues, autoimmunity. It's just exploded that I felt that we needed a different angle, a different answer. And I wanted to create something that was a food-based plan that was personalized based on a quiz. And the quiz is designed to pick up not just gut issues, but gut-related health issues that are signs that your gut is imbalanced. And by doing so, I divide people into mild, moderate, or severe. And based on that category, it tells you how you can eat for your gut type. And that's the one thing that has been so confusing for people over the years is, wait a second, like they told me that fermented foods are good, and yet when I try to eat fermented foods, I don't feel so good. Well, again, because each person is their own unique world onto themselves, and what might be good advice for one person is not necessarily good advice for another person. So I decided that I needed to create a book that allows people to personalize the plan for themselves in a way that no book before this has ever done. And that's what I put together in the GutSMART protocol.
I love that. I love that you're recognizing that we blink and there's new research, right? It's the same with sleep. We're learning so much every day, as it is with gut health, that you're willing to take the effort. I know how much effort it takes to write a book, and that's just the start, the beginning of it, and then everything else. So I really appreciate that, but also the fact that your readers can actually do that quiz, customize things for themselves, because like you said, what works for me might not work for my kids or my sister. So that is amazing. Let's jump into sleep. Is there I know there is. Let's assume we all know there is a gut sleep connection. What is that connection?
There are so many interconnections with that. Starting with the fact that you're not going to get a restful night's sleep if you lie down and your body is still trying to digest the meal that you last had before you went to bed. You want your gut to be quiet and silent, right, while you sleep. There's a lot of factors that could affect that, from not having enough stomach acid production, pancreatic insufficiency, leaky gut that affects the brush border. You're not able to break down the food fast enough. So maybe even though you ate 3 hours before going to bed, which is what people recommend, you're still digesting your food. It hasn't moved down, and you lie down and you feel uncomfortable. Maybe you have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and you're bloated, and that's also making you feel uncomfortable, and you can't relax enough so that you can fall asleep and have a good night's rest. And I'm sure everybody remembers those nights when you went out to a really big dinner and it took hours to digest, and you went to sleep, and then an hour or two after you wake up and your stomach is upset, you're not feeling so great. You might have some heartburn. That's why you woke up. And that's one big and important factor. When we think of sleep, we think of circadian rhythm, right? And what people might not realize is that aside from our own circadian rhythm of day, night, and sleep and wake, that there's a circadian rhythm that exists inside our bodies that is the circadian rhythm of our gut microbiome. And there's actually multiple circadian rhythms because there are different strains of bacteria that are active and feeding at different times of the day. And it's actually determined by when you eat and also the types of foods that you're eating. So if you're one of those people who eats haphazardly, and maybe one day you're eating lunch at 12 noon, another day you don't get to stop and eat lunch, then you eat at 3 p.m., then the next day you're eating at 2 p.m., then the following day you're eating at 4 p.m. Well, you're confusing the hell out of your gut microbiome. And the bacteria don't know where the circadian rhythm is because you're telling them that the day is shifting all the time. And the interesting thing is that they did a study on mice in Israel, and they wanted to look at what are the effects of jet lag on the gut microbiome. So they took these mice and they simulated by artificial lighting what it would be like to get on a flight from Tel Aviv to San Francisco, stay in San Francisco for 3 days, and then get on a plane and return to Tel Aviv. But they're just using alterations in when the lights were on and off. Nothing changed in the diet. The diet stayed about the same, but when we travel, we're eating at odd hours. We're changing the time that we eat. The thing that was quite significant in this is that the day-night shift changed and affected the circadian rhythm of our gut microbiome. And by doing that, it actually caused shifts in the gut microbiome that increased inflammation and insulin resistance in the body. And they could measure these things and they would lead to weight gain. And we know that if you don't sleep well, if you're not getting adequate sleep, you're actually going to increase inflammation in the body, right? And we talk about when I talk about the gut, I talk about it as the biggest interface for potential inflammation because of the foods you eat, through leaky gut, through increase in gut permeability. So when your gut is inflamed and you have leaky gut, a substance is going to get through the gut barrier that is called endotoxin. It comes from bacteria that live in the large intestine. And that endotoxin, also known as LPS or lipopolysaccharide, is fat soluble and can cross cell membranes. It crosses the blood-brain barrier and it gets into the hypothalamus. And in the hypothalamus, it activates an intracellular pathway that turns on inflammatory signal. When your brain is inflamed, you're going to be depressed, you're going to be anxious, you're not going to feel right. So there's a lot of interrelations between the gut and sleep that can either be mechanical from the role that the gut plays in just moving food through and how comfortable you feel. We know that you're going to sleep better if you're in a semi-fasted state, but you also don't want to over diet to the point where you're not getting the right combination of macros at dinner. So when you go to sleep, you're about to put your head on the pillow and suddenly you feel like you're hungry because all you had was a salad with a little protein for dinner, and you didn't get the right proportion of fats, and you didn't also get the right proportion of complex carbohydrates that are needed to help generate some of those neurochemicals that are so important for feeling relaxed and satiated at night. So we know that that's important, but we also have found through studies that the gut actually produces melatonin, that the brain is not the only part of our bodies that produce melatonin, and that the melatonin produced in the gut can be as high as 400 times the melatonin that's produced inside the brain by the pineal gland. And that melatonin is being produced by our gut and the gut microbiome, and it's affecting things like gut motility. So I'm sure you've discussed this in your podcast, that melatonin is not just a sleep hormone, that it is the most powerful antioxidant and anti-inflammatory in the body. And it's actually produced inside every single cell in the body by the mitochondria, where it is used to protect the mitochondria from oxidative damage. And it's not secreted to the rest of the body, but it also plays a really important role in the gut because it also influences gut motility, which is also very important for feeling comfortable and well rested.
Yeah, there's so much to actually take apart here. So even for our listeners, what Dr. Pedre is talking about is one aspect, but then you look at it from somebody that actually has apnea, that actually has sleep disorders. Those are already causing inflammation in the gut. And then what do? We are actually compensating for that lack of energy because your brain isn't getting enough oxygen by putting in all kinds of junk into your body, right? And we get into this loop where this patient may or may not have leaky gut. Well, they're certainly on their way to developing it because of unhealthy eating habits, because of sleep issues, be it insomnia, be it not getting enough quality sleep or even enough hours of sleep. And at some point, we need to go in and break that cycle because, the definition of insanity, right? You keep doing the same thing and expecting a different answer or a different result, but we're forgetting to take one into consideration with the other. And I love that you drove home the point about melatonin, because what do I see most commonly for my patients that have sleep issues? Oh, I'm just going to pop over the counter melatonin. And it comes in gummy form. So it's even more delicious. And I was like, that's not always the answer. Because how about we go back to the root cause and see what we can do to address that?
And I like that you brought that up about the eating with the sleep disturbance, because I remember a study that I heard they took healthy individuals and they put them in a controlled environment and then sleep deprived them and watched what their eating patterns were. And the more sleep deprived they were, the more they craved sugar and the more they craved refined carbohydrate. And well, hello, I can tell you about that because I was a sleep deprived resident in the hospital staying up all night. And I can tell you that at 3 a.m, when you're exhausted, but you can't put your head down, what you're doing in between patients is you're going to the vending machine and you're buying chocolate, you're buying sweets, you're buying all sorts of sugars, crackers, things just to get you through the night. And you're running that sugar high. But what you need to consider is what's happening. So if you're sleep deprived, you're craving more caffeine, more stimulants, more sugar, more refined carbohydrates, and that's going to cause alterations in your gut microbiome. It might cause yeast overgrowth. It might cause the overgrowth of bad bacteria. And once you get those, then you get an increase in gut permeability. You get leaky gut that then leads to inflammation, increase in inflammation in the body, which is the direct avenue for all chronic degenerative disease.
Yes. I cannot say yes enough here. In this new book of yours, you talk about gut-centric and gut-related symptoms. Tell us what's the difference.
Yeah, gut-centric symptoms are, as they might imply, are symptoms that you feel in your gut. So a lot of people who have gut issues, there are 896 million people on the planet that suffer from IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, and it could be diarrhea, constipation. You know that you have bowel issues if you have abdominal pain, if you have bloating, if you have any changes in your bowel habit. Now, there's a whole other set of symptoms, and this actually is a bigger bucket that we call gut-related symptoms. And the gateway or the portal to these symptoms is leaky gut. And you might not think that you have a gut-related health issue, but we're in a sleep podcast, but you don't sleep well. Your hormones feel imbalanced. Maybe you're showing signs of estrogen dominance. Your breasts are swelling. You're getting fibrocystic breasts. You're getting uterine fibroids. And you're not thinking, well, could this be gut related? Well, it could. There could be an aspect of that is gut related. Or you feel exhausted and you're having thyroid issues and you've got autoimmune thyroiditis and you need to sleep all the time. And yet no matter how much sleep you get 8 to 10 hours a night, you still feel exhausted. Well, part of that thyroid hormone gets activated in your gut by your gut microbiome. So if your gut is unhealthy, then that's going to affect your energy levels like that. But also skin issues, brain issues, which can be as simple as mental fog, like just feeling like your memory's not there, you can't think as clearly, and you're thinking, maybe I'm just getting old, but you're not thinking, it could be yeast overgrowth in your gut. It could be some sort of parasitic infection or some sort of imbalance that's leading to this mental fog. I mentioned autoimmunity, airway issues, allergies, asthma, sinus issues, chronic sinusitis, nasal polyps. All of these things can be related to food sensitivities, food reactions that are happening in the gut that are having these ripple effects throughout the rest of the body, getting migraines, headaches, but also sometimes it registers as kind of more of a general thing. So maybe immune dysfunction, getting sick more easily, fatigue, body fatigue, joint aches. And the thing is, you don't have to have gut symptom to have a gut related health issue. And that's super important for people to know. I had this one patient that I will never forget. She was from India and she had come to the US and she was a new mom. She had a 4-year-old at home and she was super exhausted and she had gotten achy, but then she started developing hives and she just wasn't feeling well. Her energy was super low and she had been to doctors and they had found like her blood was lighting up, like inflammation, like 5 different autoimmune markers. So they wanted to put her on steroids. They wanted to put her on immunologic immunosuppressants. And she came to me because she had read my first book and she just intuitively knew, like, it doesn't make sense to suppress my immunity to deal with these issues. There's got to be something bigger. And so as part of the protocol, we took dairy and wheat out of her diet.
Which is a huge part of Indian food, I should know.
It's a huge part of Indian food, but if you think about someone coming from India, the wheat being used in India is slightly different, right, than the wheat that is being used in the US.
Correct.
And her reactions had really magnified after her move. I'm sure there was stress. So stress also is going to increase gut permeability, leaky gut. Well, within the first 30 days of having taken wheat and dairy out of the diet, her hives were down by 50%. And by 2 months, the hives were gone. But she was still having these joint aches. And I was thinking, rule out things like Lyme disease, other, potential causes. We don't want to just say, okay, it's your gut and forget about all these other things. But when I met her and I asked her, well, do you have gut issues? Because I just felt like, oh my God, you have all these gut related symptoms. You have to have something, even just a little thing. And sometimes as a doctor, you ask a patient a question one way and they say no. And we know to be sneaky and we ask the question a different way because we're thinking, well, maybe they said no here, but maybe they're going to give me something over here. So I asked her in different ways to see if she had any gut issues. And it was no, normal bowel movements. I feel fine. I don't have any abdominal pain, no bloating. But luckily she was open-minded. She had read about functional medicine and I explained to her, look, I know you don't have gut symptoms, but maybe you have a gut-related health issue and let's look in your gut. Let's do a stool analysis as part of our workup of the things we're going to do. Well, she had a parasite. She ended up having blastocystis hominis, which if you look up if you do an internet search, you're going to find that Western medicine says that it's a benign parasite that doesn't cause a lot of problems for people. And yet, if you do a PubMed search on blastocystis, you're going to find papers showing that blastocystis hominis has been shown to increase gut permeability and cause leaky gut. She also had yeast overgrowth, not candida, but another yeast. I think it was Theotrichum or Rhodotorula, one of those. And so we put her on a protocol to get rid of the yeast and to deal with the blastocystis. After she got on this protocol, energy came up, those weird joint pains disappeared, and she started feeling more like her old self. And of course, during this time, she was still eating gluten-free, dairy-free. I think eventually I followed her for at least 2 years after that, and she was able to maintain. I think little by little, she started incorporating some wheat back, or maybe was getting more of the ancient wheat and using that to make her own chapatis and things at home. So not use the US dwarf wheat, which is much higher in gluten. And she never backtracked, and she never had to go on steroids. She never had to go on biologics. So I think the take home here is that you might not have gut issues. You might not think that you do, but if you have any symptoms that are related to leaky gut, all these gut related symptoms, you still have a gut issue. And addressing and focusing on the gut is going to improve a lot of other things in your health. And that's one of the big messages that I hope to get across to people, is how important and foundational the gut is to so many things. I can't tell you how many times when I've put people on a cleanse, a gut cleanse, and one of the things they'll tell me is that by the end of the first week, they're sleeping better than they've slept in a long time. Well, we've taken out excess sugar, alcohol, all these inflammatory foods that were disrupting their sleep without them realizing that they were sleep disruptors. And by reducing the inflammation in their gut, now their body is in such a better state. And a lot of times you actually might feel a little bit tired when you make these dietary changes. And I tell people, honor and respect your body, and allow your body to, if you feel like you need to go to bed early when you're making these changes, like just allow yourself to do that, because that's your body saying like it needs the rest in order to be able to repair itself.
Yeah. And something struck me earlier. We were talking about this female patient of yours, and you talked about setting the foundation. We deal with a lot of kids as well that have sleep issues. What is your advice to parents, to moms that make up the majority of the demographic of our podcast listeners? Where and when should they start with children? Obviously, prevention is better than cure. I'd rather avoid it than have to go back to fix it. Would you mind talking a little bit about that?
First thing there is, we need to do as much as we can to protect the integrity of the gut microbiome of the child. And that's starting from prenatal planning, like when the woman is pregnant. And if you know that for whatever reason you might have to have a C-section instead of a natural vaginal birth, ask the pediatrician to use a sterile gauze and use it to put it inside the vagina and have it get full of all that vaginal good microbiome that the child will have missed out on born by C-section, and then just wipe them down with it, because it's so important. That's such a key to the development of the gut microbiome. And then breastfeeding is so important, because those human milk oligosaccharides that the baby gets through the breast milk is going to help develop that bifidobacterium infantis, which is one of the most important microbes, strains that live in the gut in the early years. So protecting the microbiome as best we can then by trying to avoid antibiotics in our children. And then recognizing if there's a parent that has gluten sensitivity, there's a very strong chance that your child will also have inherited that sensitivity. Changing the diet for children, I think, I don't know. I think that parents think it's more overwhelming than it has to be. And I can speak from example because I have a son. He's 18 years old now. And when he was 5 years old, he started having behavioral issues at school, and he was having tantrums and just like completely behaving in ways that was not my child. And I thought, wow, this is crazy. And by then I knew that I was gluten sensitive, but we hadn't completely taken gluten out of his diet, thinking, we were sending him with to school with meals that sometimes included sandwiches, and we were using regular sandwich bread. And I asked the teacher, like, when is this happening? When is he when is he having these issues? Is it before lunch? Maybe he's hungry. Maybe we didn't feed him enough for breakfast. Maybe his blood sugar is dropping. Or is it after lunch, after he's had the sandwich? Maybe the sandwich is affecting him. And she didn't know. So I just made an executive decision as a father and doctor and knowing functional medicine and being early on and having worked on healing my gut. And we decided, I said, you know what, we know that gluten can lead to behavioral issues in kids and can cause all sorts of disturbances. It can cause hyperactivity. It can disturb their sleep. Let's take gluten out of his diet. And we became a 100% gluten-free household. Now he's 5 years old, he's in kindergarten. And the amazing thing with children is that they respond to changes really quickly. Now, we didn't tell him that we were changing his diet. We just went about life and everything as if nothing had changed. And this is your lunch now and has no gluten. Within the end of the first week, the teacher reported that his behavior had already started improving. And by 2 weeks, he was no longer having tantrums and he was no longer having outbursts at the teacher. And he was listening in class. It was that immediate. It was super immediate. And then a few months in, so that was in September, the beginning of the school year. A few months in, we were with family for the holidays and we went out and they wanted to go to a pizza place and they ordered pizza and he had not had any gluten for about 3 months. And I looked at his mom and I'm like, I don't want to be the parent that's like, being the party pooper and saying he can't have the pizza. Let's see. Let's let him have a slice, but I'm a little.
Maybe it's okay just this one time, right? We
Yeah,
make excuses.
maybe it's okay. He had that slice of pizza, and I kid you not, his eyes glassed over. He looked like a person who had had too many drinks. He started almost slurring his speech and acting drunk. And I looked at his mom and I said, see, like this is our confirmation that he is so gluten sensitive that we need to keep gluten out of the diet. And one thing for parents to know is that the blood-brain barrier hasn't fully developed itself until around the age of 5, 6, 7. And during that time, the brain is going to be very sensitive to inflammation and anything that comes through the gut. And I think that's what happened, because eventually, actually, as he grew older, he was able to start incorporating a little bit of gluten and he did not have those reactions anymore. And I think because we had so many years of healing, plus keeping him away from antibiotics, that would have been a major gut disruptor and, minimizing his exposure to that. And also we raised him to eat green and salad and vegetables. And that was something that we did from a very early age, which is a key part of developing a robust gut microbiome that actually affects the way the immune system is functioning.
Yeah, so much good stuff. So much good stuff. We are almost out of time. I really want you to share with our listeners where they can buy your book, how they can get a hold of you, work with you, get all the great information. I know you mentioned something about a download. Go ahead and share all of that with our listeners. And for those that are listening in, I will have all of this posted in the show notes. So make sure you grab all that good stuff from him. But I'm going to let him share at this point.
Yeah, thank you so much. My new book, The GutSMART Protocol, will be out in April of this year, 2023. And people can actually go to GutSMARTprotocol.com, GutSmartprotocol.com, and they can find out more about me, about my book, learn how to work with me there if they're interested. I take very limited patients, but I do work with a select few people on a ongoing basis. And I have a free gift for your listeners, because I think also maybe they're listening and they're thinking, I'm interested. This sounds really, this kind of piqued my curiosity, but I'm not sure that this is for me yet. Well, go and download a free chapter from my book that kind of gives you a big bird's eye view of what the book is about and why it's so important. And just go to gutsmartprotocol.com/gift, and you can download a free copy of a chapter from my book there with a few little surprises that I put in. And if you decide that it's for you and you want to pre-order my book, if you go to gutsmartprotocol.com, you can pre-order the book And as a gift from me to you, you'll get 5 bonuses that you don't get with the free chapter, but you get 5 bonuses when you go and pre-order the book through the website. So for anybody who's listening to this, if this speaks to you, I would say go check it out and find out the power of healing your gut through a personalized plan that helps you know what to eat and what not to eat that's best for your gut type.
That is amazing. I, for one, cannot wait to get my pre-order. Thank you so much for taking the time today and talking to us, to me. I certainly learned a lot. As always, our listeners, please make sure to share this one. If you think that you know everything there is about gut health, I can guarantee you there is something that you can learn. So go follow him. Look out for his book, share this episode.
Oh, I forgot my Instagram.
Oh my gosh, yes, we got it. Follow
all
you
the
on
things.
social.
They can watch my funny reels on Instagram. At Dr. Pedre, DrPedre on Instagram. I put out a ton of free content about how to heal the gut, things to know, inspirations, and also sometimes I do some funny reels that also educate. So I try to entertain and educate and hopefully, inspire people to see that there is a path to healing through the lens of the gut. And hopefully it inspires people to embark on that journey.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And I will see everybody next week.